we're back. Welcome back. Hopefully you met someone new downstairs. Don't apologize, it's okay. For our next speaker, we have Joe Meagher, who joined the Economic Scenario Service team at Hymans in January this year. To date, his work is focused on developing tools to manage financial risks associated with climate change. Before taking up his role, he trained as a Bayesian statistician, developing application-led methodology. During his time as a postdoc at University College Dublin and a doctoral student at the University of Warwick, he worked on problems in evolutionary biology, epidemiology, well, a lot of words here, computational social science, and bioacoustics. So welcome, Joe, to talk about the many models, few data, or how I learned to stop worrying and love climate change.
Yeah, thanks very much for the introduction there. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit today about the problems of managing climate-related risk for pension firms, pension schemes. So just to get started, the structure of this presentation, I'm going to start by introducing Hymans Robertson, the firm that I work for, and the sorts of work that we do, the kind of the range of things that people are interested in within our company. And then I'm going to speak in a little bit more detail around our economic scenario service, which is an economic scenario generator, and that's the team that I sit on. So I can talk about that in a bit more detail. And then I'm going to spend kind of the last third or last half of the talk talking about how we are adapting the products that we offer to climate change for modelling climate risk and how that might affect pension schemes into the future. So I was going to say a little bit about myself, but that actually kind of covers it. I joined Hymans this year and was doing a postdoc and PhD before that, and trained as a statistician. But yeah, so a little bit about Hymans Robertson. For those who don't know, we're a company that works alongside employers and trustees and various different financial service institutions, and we offer advice on pension schemes, but also investments and benefits and various different risk modelling and risk consulting services. And then we're also developing a lot of expertise around what you call data science, so various different data and technology solutions. So it's a reasonably big company in that we've got 1,200 employees and they're spread across 4 offices. We've got an office here in London that's actually just around the corner. There's another one in Glasgow, which is where I'm based, and then there's other offices in Edinburgh and in Birmingham. And yeah, it's a fairly well-established company in that the firm celebrated its centenary in 2021, so it's over a 100-year history. So then, about the clients, the people that we provide advice to, that we look to assist. So we provide a lot of advice to pension schemes. So they are defined benefit pension schemes and defined contribution, but also the local government pension schemes. The needs for each of those clients are a bit different, but we look to provide good advice to people managing people's pensions to make sure that they have the money to fund their retirement. We're also growing other lines of business, provide advice to financial advisors. So there are people who would provide advice to individuals and also to employers and specific individuals themselves within our personal wealth offering. And really what we're trying to do there is bring our 100 years of expertise to bear on the advice we provide to people around their investments and planning for their futures. So just to put in context the advice that we are actually providing, it's really about looking at the modelling the financial markets, how they're going to behave, and how you can invest your money to ensure that you're managing various different risks to ensure that you have the money there to fund your retirement. And so that takes in a whole range of different things. So we're looking at, things like the trading in equities, but also we need to be able to analyse the data trends that are there. There's vast amounts of data being generated by financial markets all the time. We're also interested in then kind of forward-looking on long time frames. So, if you're managing a pension, you're looking at time frames up to 100 years even. And then this is all informed by research. We need to be able to engage with the research that is coming out of academia and other market research that is out there. So this is the sort of advice that we provide. We have an awful lot of capability around data science and what we call our digital capabilities, and it takes in a lot of different things. So we go from the kind of development side in terms of managing data pipelines and visualization, but also the kind of the infrastructure that supports all that. So we have lots of developers on our team. And then we also go all the way to the kind of more statistical and mathematical modeling as well. We provide a voice to that. And the firm is populated by lots and lots of actuaries who consider themselves, the OGs of data science, I suppose. And yeah, we have these people sitting within our firm, so statisticians, actuaries, software developers. And there's a whole range of problems that people are working on and looking to solve every day inside at Hymans. So that's us, our clients, and the sorts of work that we do. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the ESS team, more specifically. So these are our team members, the 10 of us listed there, and it's a team made up of various different people. There's actuarial experience there, there's a couple of PhDs in maths and stats, and various different MScs and people doing their actuarial exams. We also have our software developers, Ross and John, who manage the big beast that is our scenario generator. And so the skills that sit within this team, they're many and varied, but they focus really in around maths and software development. They're two really big ones for us. But then also we have to be able to engage with the underlying economic theory and the finance and these sorts of things we need to take account of when we are developing our scenarios. And then obviously we have some actuarial expertise there as well. And we provide some consulting, so interpreting what it is that we're spitting out from this, our analysis. And finally then we do also do quite a bit of research in terms of understanding trends that are emerging and how they may affect our assumptions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the ESS is, just to try and get that squared off in your head. So focusing on the outputs first, what we're doing is we're producing projections of different economic indicators, things like inflation, interest rates, equity indices, and we do this for various different economies. Our base economy is the UK because most of our clients are based here in the UK. We also produce these outputs for America, for the dollar economy, for Asia, Japan, the various different economies. And so what these do is these reflect our understanding and assumptions about how markets are going to behave. And we do that by producing projections that are in monthly time steps and continue for 100 years. Now, we don't produce them for short time frames because we are providing advice to pension schemes who are more interested in the long term. But the models could be applied to much more granular sort of analysis as well. And to build these models, the inputs that we use, we do look at historical data, and we do quite a bit of data analysis to ensure that the assumptions that we're making do fit with what has occurred in the past. But for those of you that have dealt with time series a bit, you might know that we've really only got one sample of this big multivariate series. And so we do include what we call an investment overlay. So this is really our expert judgment within the firm about which trends are the relevant ones that we need to project and where we should be setting our expectations, which is not necessarily exactly what we might infer from the data, but does take into account forward-looking views. And so we have a big machine, effectively, that generates these. And just to focus on one aspect of that, which I'll be talking about later, is the real interest rate. So for the real interest rate, we come up with a stochastic model, which will give us the ways in which we expect this interest rate to vary. And then once we have a model for that, we then link that to models for things like bonds, credit spreads, equities, inflation, etc. And so this allows us to then build a model in which we have got we take into account the various different linkages between different aspects of the economy, but we also then allow us to quantify uncertainty and manage the risk. And so just for those of you who like the equations, like I do, the way we do that in general is one where we have a risk premium for risky investments, and we then use a stochastic model which quantifies our uncertainty about the future in terms of things like variance and kurtosis and these sorts of things. And these allow us to project forward into the future. So that's the modelling framework that we work with. So then to give a little bit of context in the actual output that we provide. So what I've pictured here is just a figure for representing some projections of inflation. And what we do is we have 5,000 projections. So we use a Monte Carlo method. So we crank the handle on our scenario generator, which gives us all these projections at monthly time steps for 100 years. And we do this for a lot of different variables, covering things like interest rates and bonds. But we also have some other bespoke asset classes that have been asked for by various different aspects of the business. And so, as you can imagine, this is a big wedge of data. There's a fair bit of complexity in terms of managing this and making sure that it's doing what we expect it to do. And once we get these 5,000 samples, we can produce what we call funnels around our projections, which allow us to kind of quantify our uncertainty about what's happening and understand what the extremes of the various different risks are in various different things. So yes, this is the ESS. So yeah, we're modelling the market into the future. So some of you may be wondering, why is that relevant to pensions? And so just a very, very quick crash course on how things work from an individual's perspective. If you're in a pension scheme, you pay in while you're working, you retire, you draw down from that pension. So you're contributing sums of money, and they need to then be managed and looked after to make sure that you can then fund your retirement. And you're generally in a scheme of some sort, and so if you are thinking about from a scheme perspective, they have to be able to pay the pensions way off into the future. So what I'm showing you here is an illustration of the payments that are required for a scheme to make at various different times into the future. And so you can see that they increase here. The green represents those people that are yet to retire within the scheme, while the pink is those who have already retired and are drawing down their pension already. So you can see that there's quite a lot of liabilities that have to be managed, and the way that they ensure this, because if you've got a scheme that is not growing, you can't really have a pyramid scheme where payments are funded by, or the payments out are funded by the payments coming in. They need to be invested and managed, and you need to make sure that we're giving ourselves a good chance of being able to pay all these liabilities out into the future. So hopefully you understand now why it is that the pension schemes are concerned about the performance of the financial markets into the future. And so we don't necessarily then provide our clients with output from the ESS directly, because there's a lot of processing and understanding that has to go on. We tend to provide in terms of key summary statistics. And one of the things that pension schemes are going to be interested in, given that I've just shown you that they have liabilities in the future, is that they're going to want to be able to pay those liabilities, and that's the funding level, their ability to pay. So here is just a figure of the sort of things that we will actually show to our clients based on the ESS projections. We do our analysis, and we will provide estimates of the probability that the assets will be sufficient to pay liabilities at different points in the future. And often a pension scheme is looking for a mark somewhere around the 70% probability of success. That's seen as an appropriate level of risk. So that's a kind of a crash course in terms of the ESS and the advice we provide to pensions, to pension schemes and to our clients. The title of this talk was about climate change, so perhaps you're wondering how that fits in. The thing is that with climate change, there's a possibility that the changing climate is actually going to undermine the economic system that we've assumed will continue to function as it has over the past 50 years, or whatever period of time we're interested in. And this is something that's really of concern to those who are managing these big sums of money to manage pensions. They want to be able to check, under various different assumptions, how will their strategy perform? Is it going to, is the changing climate going to cause damage to their investments, which would make it more difficult for them to actually pay retirees their pensions? And so this is something we actually have provided in the past. We have been able to, or we currently do provide, is that we can take our based on understanding of the economy as given by our scenario generator, and we do by a process of reweighting, we identify those trials out of the 5,000 that most closely match the characteristics we may expect to see under various different climate change scenarios. And this allows us to assess the risks posed by climate change. Now, some of you may be looking at this figure and see that in the legend we have a base case, but you don't necessarily see it here. And that's because it's hiding there underneath the various different scenarios we considered, with the green revolution, where we see a rapid transition in the short term, and the delayed transition, where we see something happening more after 2030, say, and then the head in the sand, where we choose to ignore climate risks at all. And this analysis seems to say that actually climate change doesn't pose any more risk than we would expect under our baseline assumptions that are kind of informed by the past 50 years. This is something that our clients have pointed out doesn't feel right, and we acknowledge ourselves this doesn't seem like a satisfactory answer. It feels as if climate change is going to actually have negative impacts on the economy, then the worst case under these scenarios should probably be worse than our baseline. And we're not the only ones that thought this. There's actually been quite a bit of controversy in the pension space this summer. There's been, in particular, 2 reports have come out. The first one, this one, the Emperor's New Climate Scenarios, effectively said that these sorts of scenario analysis I just showed you are kind of not worth the paper that they're written on, and that they're misleading, and that we're not helping our clients in the way that we should be. And this is what they've assessed. They've said they think that a different approach to climate scenarios would be much more appropriate. The second one is loading the dice against pension funds, and that took a slightly different line of attack, but again got at the same points. And this one said that the advice that pension funds have been providing is actually grounded in faulty research and faulty assumptions. So just to summarise really the challenges that we've had here, the idea is that investment consultants, so people providing advice like ourselves, have based our advice on academic research in economics, which has said that actually the damages that occur from global warming, for warming between 2 and 4 degrees up to 2100, don't worry about it. It's probably not a big deal. It's probably not going to change our underlying assumptions. The problem is that this is very much at odds with the research that's coming out of other areas of science, in climate research and what we're hearing on a day-to-day basis. So much so that the academic research in climate science suggests that a 5-degree warming scenario to 2100 is potentially catastrophic, potentially undermines our way of life entirely. And that even the warming that we've seen to date, which is 1 degree, that runs the risk of triggering what are called tipping points. This is the idea that a system reaches a point at which a change occurs that's irreversible and leads to the system reaching kind of a new normal level. So what we're thinking of in this context is things like permafrost thawing out and releasing loads of carbon, which drives global warming to a higher rate or higher level and causes increased economic damages. And the thing is, there's a huge amount of uncertainty around these things, and that our advice hasn't necessarily acknowledged that. Their position from these reports and what's being put to us is that actually climate change is something we need to treat as like an existential risk, existential threat. So we've been working really hard to try and address this. This is something that we really want to improve on and to actually provide something that is useful to people. And this is where we get to the title of my talk, the many models, few data, when it comes to modelling climate change and trying to understand what's going on. So loads of models. We've got models for projecting into the future, these shared socioeconomic pathways, which model various different social and economic factors and how they may change over the next couple of years, out to 2100. We've also then got what's called integrated assessment models, which look to link climate and economic performance together and model how they're going to change and how one interacts with the other. And then we've got other integrated assessment models which look to identify what is the optimal level of global warming, trying to balance out this desire for economic development, which has improved all our living standards, versus the global warming that's occurring and the change and the damages that's going to occur. Also, if you're interested in very specific things like flood risk or food security, there's global crop models and models for rising water levels. There's a huge number of models out there. But the data is a little bit more difficult. Now, I'm a little bit cheeky here. There's more data than I'm showing here. But what I'm trying to illustrate is that over the past 800,000 years, we've had CO2 concentrations at a particular level. And that has completely changed over the last 50 years. And so while we do have current data for modelling trends, the underlying system has seen this rapid change. And for those of you who've worked on data science problems, interpolation is often easy, but extrapolation becomes difficult. And what we've done is we've moved into a different space to where we've been for the past 100 years. And so the underlying system may be changing in ways we don't understand. And so that means that the data that is available to us, we need to be quite careful with it and what we draw from it. So, given all that, we need some solutions. We need some way of trying to manage this and trying to understand the risks that we're dealing with. And one of the solutions that's been proposed is this idea of scenario analysis. And at Hymans, we are developing scenarios which are, what they are is they're narrative-based tools. So the idea is we construct a story about what's going on. And really what we're doing is we then try to assess what's currently happening as best we can, and then we construct a narrative around that, identify themes, project them forward, and understand how they may interact. So it's a story that is very much based, the characters and plot are very much based on things and things that are happening now. And one of the reasons that this is useful is this idea that narratives are modelling for breakfast. As humans, we tend to be narrative-based decision makers. We come up with a story in our head, and we will make decisions based off that. We're not particularly good at statistical thinking and managing uncertainty in our heads. It's difficult for us. Whereas a narrative, we can get our head around. We can make decisions based on that a little bit more easily, and it can clarify things. And it's actually a really quite well-established decision-making tool. It's been used in military circles for quite a long time, and also quite heavily used in problems around food security and these sorts of things. So we've been looking to adopt this kind of approach. So just to give you an idea of how scenario analysis might work. First thing you would do is something that we call a PES analysis. So you're looking at what's this idea of horizon scanning. You're looking forward, you're trying to identify what are the key trends, key political trends, what geopolitical forces are there that we may want to think about, or at least account for in our kind of our story that we're producing. And then also the economics. Where is growth happening, and what are the drivers of that growth? And where else might growth not be happening, and what are the reasons for that? And then we're also interested in how is society going to respond to these changes that we're talking about. We have to account for that as well, or at least engage with it to an extent. But then there's also the technological factor, which is what technologies are being developed and what changes might they make and drive. So then once we've identified that, because to an extent this is going to be depending on the perspective of the people involved. So you're going to want a fairly diverse team to pull this together who have a diverse range of interests. But then you're going to want to go and find supporting evidence, because a lot of the time we can make statements based on a gut feeling that actually when you go and try to find the evidence to support it, it's just not there. Maybe you have to reel yourself in a little bit. So that's a really important aspect of this, is that we try to support what we're saying. And then once you've got this evidence and you've tried to pick out the key themes and what it is that's important, you construct a narrative. And it's a storyline that highlights the key risks that we're interested in and how they might interact, and it allows people to engage with the problems that we're facing. It's this idea. So just to give you a really high-level kind of description of the scenario that we've worked on. We started with considering what might happen if there was to be a simultaneous breadbasket failure. So just to give you a bit of context on that, food production in the world is concentrated in a couple of regions, Midwest America being one, there's Argentina and Brazil being another, Europe, Ukraine, Russia, and then also around India and Southeast Asia. These regions produce a huge amount of food. A disproportionate amount of the world's food, given the area that they occupy. Now, by trading food, we try to mitigate the effects of crop failure in one area by balancing out with that the growth is good in another area. However, if these become a bit more correlated, we might see a situation where multiple breadbaskets are affected at one point in time. And actually, when you go and you look at the evidence, you see what's coming out of the academic research, it suggests that actually a drop in yields of between 18 and 35-ish% is actually plausible in terms of how synchronized these different breadbaskets might become, and that the risk of that happening appears to be changing and appears to be increasing. So this is something that we should probably be engaging with and thinking about a little bit. So what we actually try to model, the bit that we're interested in, is understanding how policy and markets might respond to this event. And so in this scenario, we've set out a view that breadbasket failure would result in what we're calling price rises and protectionism. The idea being that prices go up because of reduction in supply, and that governments then respond by trying to protect their populations from the worst effects of this. And that will have a series of knock-on consequences. And so we then model that specific effect, and then we begin to move forward and take a slightly longer term view, move out into the medium term, say. And we consider what might happen if this reduction in food supply continues. We find that actually the old ways are not quite working the way that we would have expected them to. And at that point, we consider a kind of two branching paths. And the idea here is that each path highlights a different theme or is dominated by a different theme. So if, say, the world was to decide that actually this problem that we have with the food supply is actually due to climate change, and that we need to work together on this, then we have this view which we're calling collaborative regeneration. The idea is that the tools that are available get applied, and that countries work together, moderate demand, and what might occur from there. And that creates a first pathway for us. On the other hand, countries may decide that their own national security is the first thing that they need to care about. That's food security and energy security, for example. And that's going to lead to a slightly different policy mix, but maybe quite different policy mix. And then that's going to have a different effect on the variables of interest on the market. And that might be seen as a slightly more risky strategy because it might involve really boosting fossil fuel use and emissions and these sorts of things. And so, we then consider what might happen in terms of what are the two different paths that may occur from there. One being this idea that we have, the idea that we hit tipping points where, as I said, the system gets a momentum of its own. And so one of those is where technology improves and takes over. This is the kind of tech utopian view. And we see ourselves on the walking the tightrope pathway. And then we may consider another one where the climate tipping points actually dominate and that economic damages run away from our ability to adapt, and this is our climate catastrophe. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to engage with the different possibilities that are driven by climate change and construct a narrative around that allows people to understand what it is we're assuming under different scenarios, different pathways. So if you're wondering, so what? We've developed a story, lovely, fantastic. So we see this as a couple of things. We see a couple of so whats from this, or at least within our team we do. One is that this actually motivates stress tests, so we can develop some assumptions about the economy based on the story and how that might move, and we can see, okay, how does your funding strategy behave? Are you going to be fully funded or hit your targets under these different scenarios? The second one is that it's making explicit the risks and trends that are actually only implicitly considered within the ESS. So our scenario generation, it's stochastic models. It models covariances. Now those covariances aggregate over a whole load of different risks. Climate risk potentially being one of them, but it's not explicitly accounted for. So it allows us to engage with the assumptions that we have over ESS in a little bit more detail. And then finally, it can inform strategic decision making. So it allows you to highlight what sort of future you're gambling on or betting on with your funding strategy and whether or not that's the future you want. And ask yourself, is that the future you want to bet on? And this is another area in which we're looking to develop good, sound advice for pension schemes. So I want to deal a little bit with the stress test piece. The idea here, this is why I mentioned real yields as one of the things. What we do is we take our distribution for our base case and we shift that according to a change in assumptions under particular scenarios. So I'm showing you here is in the collaborative regeneration piece. Basically, we see an initial response due to the food shock, see a reduction in real yields, and then because of the dynamics of regeneration and the costs involved in this sort of activity, we expect that real yields will probably stay a little bit below the baseline before recovering out into the future. On the other hand, the walking the tightrope, which again sees a big drop initially due to the initial shock, it's a kind of a go for broke, a race for growth strategy, and so we see a boost in real yields. And these are sorts of things that we can tease out from the scenario. And then we can take these stress tests and we can apply them to the funding levels that I showed you earlier. And we can show this to clients. And then we can say, look, these are our baseline assumptions about where your funding level is going to be. But under these scenarios, this is how they might behave. And so you can see that actually the walking the tightrope seems to hit that 70% mark much more easily in collaborative regeneration. But the idea is that then the climate catastrophe is problematic in that it's a bit of a disaster, really, for your funding levels. Meanwhile, the collaborative regeneration, while you're a bit slower to get to that 70% target, you do still reach it. So yeah, what does this have to do with data science? Which I suppose is a fair question at this point. I see a couple of points. The whole thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to assess evidence. And evidence comes in lots of different ways. Sometimes we have data, and we can remodel that data in a lot of detail. But often we have lots of different disparate pieces of evidence that we want to incorporate into our decision making that are not necessarily captured by a straightforward model. It's not in the form that we want. And so doing this sort of scenario analysis allows us to take the tool set that we might have from as data scientists in terms of modeling specific aspects, but allows us to combine it and allows us to think about what it is that we're actually saying with our models and trying to model and trying to predict or forecast or project, whatever word you like to use. The other point is that it's really important to have an understanding of the models that you're using and their limitations and what it is that you're actually doing, and understanding, the difference between interpolation and extrapolation and how the different models that are being used may behave in those scenarios or under these assumptions. And so really actually having that deep technical expertise and understanding that you develop as a data scientist is really important for this more qualitative, narrative-based kind of thinking. Then as a statistician, my favorite is, we engage with and really quantify our uncertainty around things. I think that's really important. This is how we manage risk, is that we try to identify, okay, well, fair enough, we can estimate an average, but what's the range that we're dealing with? How good is this a projection that we're making? And how much should we base our decisions actually on these estimates that we're producing? Then on a really practical side, we have to link this with our existing digital offering, all the data science tools that we already offer. So, there's a lot of infrastructure behind the tools that our consultants use to provide advice to clients. And we have to be able to link this new research and new products that we're developing in with those. And I'm sure many of us in our data science practice have got to a point where we find that actually we're trying to answer a problem and there's no easy answer. We can do the modelling that we want, but it's quite difficult to pick out the trends or really have confidence in the forecast that we're making. And there is the question of what do we do there. And this kind of narrative-based approach does give you a framework to think about, okay, how do we strategize when there are no easy answers? All right, so I'm just about to wrap up here. But I'll talk a little bit about the future work that we're doing at Hymans. So from my perspective, sitting on the ESS team, the sorts of things I'm interested in is really to do with our models. Are they adequate? So that covers a whole gamut of things from, are the underlying assumptions, do they line up with what we actually expect to be happening? Are they reasonable? Are they sound? Are they supported by evidence that we're seeing? And then also the models, because there are limitations to our models. Do they account for the effects that we think are relevant here? Then also the calibration, so that's the fitting, choosing the correct parameters, but choosing suitable parameters, or should we actually be allowing for ranges in our parameters, not necessarily fixing these things? Or which parameters is it important to try and account for the risk that there's a little bit of variation there on? But then also, in terms of the practical implementation, are we actually using our resources effectively? Are these implemented correctly? Is the technology that we're using to generate things performing, and is it resilient and sound and robust? And then a more bigger picture is, are we actually meeting the client's needs? So by doing all this work, is this actually allowing clients to make better decisions? And that's something we need to really keep in view all the time. So yeah, very much ensuring that the perfect solution that I might like to come up with is not necessarily the one that's needed. We need to come up with one that's good enough. Then in terms of skills that are required for the sort of jobs that we're doing. So absolutely there's definitely a need for these kind of hard technical skills around coding and understanding how to move data around the place and these sorts of things. That's absolutely important. But given you have those, it really becomes important to be able to structure your thinking and to communicate that. So I'd be a big advocate for writing stuff down, documentation, these sorts of things, to make sure that not only can we produce good work that we can collaborate with others on, but that we can collaborate with the future versions of ourselves that may be confused if we don't communicate quite clearly. And then in terms of the people that we're looking for and that we need working on these, the values at Hymans we have are that we look to be confident, friendly, partnering, and straightforward. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of practice and effort, but that's what we're aiming for. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Great talk. I was just wondering how the vast increase in computing power, does that help you? It doesn't seem like that's necessarily relevant, but yeah, does that make a difference?
So the short answer is yes, because it allows us to generate these scenarios much more quickly. It allows us to build richer scenarios that account for, or sorry, when I talk about scenarios, I'm talking about our 5,000 simulations into the future. So computing power allows us to generate those more quickly. It allows us to include more variables in there to meet our clients' needs a little bit better. So yeah, I would say that the increase in computing power do make a difference, although I suppose not necessarily in terms of the building our generative AI type models. There is work happening in the firm in a separate team to look how we can incorporate those tools into our offering. But yeah, I don't really engage with that in my current position. I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully, yeah.
Thanks. Other questions? I saw some hands raised.
A few up here.
Oh.
Thank you very much for providing the insights and impact of the best scenarios. So my question is about, in your modeling, have you tried to analyze and identify feature imbalance because of past scenarios? So you have different past scenarios, and that may map to feature imbalance. So have you tried to incorporate those in your models? If yes, how?
So if I can just try and feed back that question to you. In our scenarios, they're built on a particular set of features, and are we trying to account for the fact that those features are biased in some way? That's a good question. I would say that because of the modeling approach we take, which is a stochastic modeling approach, we tend to just project into the future, so time is the main input. And what we then model is the correlations. So our estimates for the various different parameters will be affected by the data that's available, and so it will be affected by this feature imbalance you're talking about. But we do try to account for that by taking, as I said, the investment overlay, by talking to the experts within our firm to identify which trends in the historical data are unusual and should be adjusted for, and what our best estimates on how they're going to perform in the future is. So I think the answer to your question is yes, we do try.
One final question. Oh, maybe.
Thank you. So you mentioned that there are a lot of new data, a lot of new models required, and probably the old models and old strategies are not really used. However, on the other side, the pension funds are probably the most regulated financial sector. How easy is to bring up something new and to introduce new models and new
So I would
methods?
have to caveat any answer I give here by saying I've not been at the firm for a year yet. I've only been in this space for a while. And what I would say is that it depends on the pension scheme. What we're seeing from the local government pension schemes in particular, because they have a much more long-term view, just by the nature of the way they operate. But they are also driven by political considerations as well. And so you see a different level of demand for new products and thinking about particularly climate change coming from that aspect of the market, whereas, say, our other defined benefit pensions who are maybe close to new members and have a much shorter term view are maybe less worried about the sorts of climate scenarios. So it's there's definitely pockets that there's very definitely demand for this kind of thing, and it's about trying to meet the needs of the people that are looking for it. In terms of how easy it is to actually bring these new things to market, come back to me in 3 or 4 years and I'll give you a better answer.
Thank you very much for your time, Joe. It was
Cheers.
really informative. So thanks.